Does age matter? We are talking to Dr. Gudmundur Olafsson. We're asking this question. Dr. Olafsson, does age matter?
Yes and no. It does matter in certain areas, but in other areas it does not.
Okay.
I have an experience that might show how age does not always matter.
Okay.
I'm definitely a retirement age, as everybody can see. But when it came time to retire, my wife and I, we were faced with quite a bit of a dilemma. At the time, we were working in England and had been working there for almost 15 years. My wife is from Denmark. I'm from Iceland. The immediate family of my wife, they were living here on the west coast in the US. I have a brother in Norway. I have a sister in Denmark. We have a son in Germany, a daughter in Norway, and then 3 children here in the US, and several grandchildren in Iceland. So the dilemma came up, where should we retire? And we joked with it in the idea that perhaps the best way would be to retire in an airplane, so we could visit the various individuals of the family. We had been working in Iceland for about 20 years, and as I say, in England for about 15. And so we were wondering what to do. But then one day came something interesting that happened. My wife had a phone call in the day from a lady with whom she had studied nursing 15 years earlier, and this lady was asking her whether she would be interested in and being able to join the nursing force at a hospital in Napa Valley. They were short on nurses. And what made this call so interesting was that this lady had never contacted my wife all those 15 years, but she had found someone who knew the phone number and called us. And my wife said, let's wait a little bit, I'll check with my husband. And when I came home in the evening, she told me about this experience. And then what came into the picture was the fact that her mother was having an open heart surgery. And she was living just south of Loma Linda in California. And so we decided, why don't you go over there and visit your mother and see how everything is going there? And at the same time, you can go to Napa Valley, because some of our children lived here in Sacramento area, and they could drive her over there and she could have a look what it would be all about. What made many people might say this was a very interesting coincidence, but to us there was more than a coincidence, because 2 days earlier my wife had prayed to God. God, you see, we are faced with a dilemma. We don't really know where to go and what to do. Please show us what to do. 2 days later, this phone call came. What complicated the issue was that this was just a couple of weeks after the famous 9/11 attack, where all flights were stopped and everybody became very insecure. But we decided that perhaps this might be the safest way, time to travel, because security would be top after such an attack. And to make a long story short, a little over a year later, we were here at the time of our retirement, when we retired.
Great.
And we have been here since.
Well, welcome. Now let me ask you something. You're a doctor. What type of a doctor are you?
Well, my specialty is biblical languages and the Old Testament.
Okay. So you're a scholar. Yes.
Well, some people call it that.
Okay. Well, tell me, now that you are retired, how do you feel about being useful the way you used to be, or how maybe you thought you used to be? Because I'm sure you're still useful. What is the comparison between now and then?
Well, I think possibly it has to do with energy, and also it takes longer to think about some issues, to remember them. But what comes as a positive side is that the experience you have had and gained through the years can help you in areas that you were not so secure about when you were younger.
Okay. So, for example, give me an example. What have you done more since you've been retired as compared to before?
Well, one thing that I've been able to do, which I kind of enjoy, is that for the last almost 15 years, I have translated into Icelandic kind of Bible study projects for the church in Iceland.
That's great.
And so, in a sense, I have done more for the church in Iceland after I retired than when I was working there teaching on the secondary level.
Now, that's amazing. And now you couldn't do that because you were so busy and occupied with all that type of work.
That's right.
So someone's listening and they're watching, they're saying, I'm not a scholar, I'm a mechanic, or I'm a doctor, or I'm in some other profession. And so what you're saying is that it's possible that at the end, when they retire and they have that free time, that they may actually be able to really focus in and do something amazing to help somebody else.
Yes.
Okay.
They may not be able to do exactly the same thing, but they might be able to emphasize certain areas that they have not been able to emphasize while they were doing their, quote, regular work.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Now tell me, as you look at life, you are no longer in your 20s or your 30s, your 40s, etc. Your retirement age. Have you gotten wiser?
Well, it depends on how you define wisdom.
Okay.
Usually wisdom is defined as applying the knowledge that you have.
Okay.
And I think that is what comes with age.
Okay.
You have to try it out where you're younger, and then from that experience, trial and error, you realize that this way works and that one does not work as well.
Okay. And as you look at your health and your relationship with your wife, what do you see anything now different from the perspective of a person with experience?
Well, when it comes to health, when you're working full time, you don't always have time to take care of your health as such. You just keep going, and then if you become sick for a couple of days, you just take that and then back to work. But once you are retired, you are more a master of your time, and you can apply that time more positively toward your health than perhaps while you were working.
Okay.
In my experience, for the last few years, I try to do what I call jog walking. Try to jog quite a bit, but when I become tired, I walk a little bit and then continue jogging, and trying to do that a couple of times a week. And my cardiologist says that's really what is keeping you alive.
That's awesome.
I did not have time for that while I was working full time, but now I can take time to do it.
That's great. And in terms of your relationship with your wife, how have things changed as you've grown and the years have passed?
Well, I can spend more time with her, because when you're working, you mostly see your spouse in the evening and perhaps early morning, and then almost that's it. And hopefully on something around weekends. But now you can be together most of the time, and that has increased our relationship with each other.
That's awesome.
Our love and care for each other.
That's great. Now, sometimes I look at the white hairs I'm getting, and I say they're a sign of wisdom.
Yeah.
They're not always, like you say, exactly make you brilliant, but we have gone through trial and error, and we've learned something. Now, I want to ask you something, because you're a biblical scholar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, as you look, because we're looking at the book of Daniel, as you look at the book of Daniel and you look at his age and how, what God revealed to him in his age, what can you tell us about that?
Well, actually, that's a very interesting point. There is, as far as I know, there is no other book in the Bible that is as accurately dated chapter by chapter as the book of Daniel. I think there are only about 2 or 3 chapters in the whole book that are not exactly dated. And so we can see how that spread over his life. And it comes up a very interesting picture of the work of Daniel. The book consists of 12 chapters. The first 3 chapters describe experiences that Daniel had as a teenager. He may even have started at the age of possibly around 15.
Okay.
And then another chapter when he was about 17. And the third chapter may deal with him or talk about the events when he was about 20. So 1/4 of the book is dealing with events that happened in his life when he was still a teenager.
All right.
Then comes the time when you're most busy in your work, from around 20 to in our modern age, mid-60s. In that time, we find only 1 chapter that deals with some issues. It was about when he was possibly around 50 years of age. Then when he come to retirement age, we don't know what the retirement age was at that time.
Sure.
But if we look at our current time period, usually retirement age begins around 65 or 67. When he was in the late 60s, he had the 2 chapters dealing with experiences that he had, especially with God at that time. And usually Daniel is known for the visions that he had. And the first vision he got was when he was in the mid to late 60s.
Okay.
And actually all of the visions in Daniel come at the time when he was in retirement. So the 2 chapters when he was 67 and 69 possibly, and the remaining 6 chapters, so about half of the book, was written while he was in his 80s.
Okay.
And they include 2 visions and also an interpretation, a very interesting interpretation that he was called in to do. And even at that time, he was seen to be that influential that some of his co-workers, they were filled with jealousy toward him, and they had him thrown into a lion's den.
Yeah.
And at that time, he was almost in his mid-80s.
Now that is a definite insight, because a lot of times you look at the books and he doesn't look that old. So
No.
they're basically taking somebody that could have been using a cane or a walker,
Yeah.
throwing him into a lion's den.
So it's interesting to notice that 2/3 of the book dealing with experiences after he reached what we would call today retirement age. But also 3 of the chapters come from the time when he was a teenager. And these are the 2 groups that often think that they are excluded from any influential or important work.
Yeah.
But the time that we usually think of as the most productive time, which is the work time, there's nothing, or hardly anything.
Interesting.
But that doesn't mean that the individual was not active as such, but he may not have had time to deal with those issues that he had time once he got into retirement.
Those are great insights. So I like a number of things that you said. One thing that I liked is teenagers and older people, they feel like they're ostracized or they're left out, they're not important. But the book of Daniel shows that both of those age groups were very important.
Yeah.
In fact, he got the majority of all of his visions when he was older.
That's right. Yeah.
Another thing that you said that struck me is in the middle there when he was working, he only had one main thing there that happened because he was so busy.
Yeah.
And so maybe that tells those of us that are in the workforce and we're working so hard, maybe some people are going to think they're going to retire early, or maybe some people are going to say, you know what, maybe I need to open up some room in my busyness that maybe God can really flow into me and through me to bless somebody else.
Yeah. I think it all depends on the attitude of the individual, because we see that all through the book of Daniel, Daniel keeps very much in touch with his God, constantly, and God uses that so much so that in the end, it's very interesting in those chapters that are part of his final life, chapter 9 and 10, 3 times, an angel from God tells him that he is highly esteemed, not in the eyes necessarily of the people, but in the eyes of God himself. But at the same time, even in his 80s, the leaders like Darius, who was king of one of the famous kings in Persia, he saw him so valuable that he put him as almost second in command in the nation.
Yeah.
But at that time, he was already in his 80s.
Wow.
And that's what caused great jealousy of his co-workers.
Yeah, they wanted to throw him in the lion's den.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking of the story of Jesus. So Jesus didn't start his public ministry till he was about the age of 30.
That's right.
And so he didn't do anything wrong. He was busy working.
Yeah.
But then there came a time where he had to put that stuff away,
Yeah.
and he had to focus full time on his spiritual ministry.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
great. So tell me, what else comes to your minds from the book of Daniel? Anything else? Daniel chapter 10 or anything?
These were the most important things because, like for instance, we are told about those visions that Daniel had. These were not just revealing what is going to happen tomorrow for Daniel, but it is pointed out these are things that are going to happen way, way in the future.
Okay.
And it was so much in the future that we read in those chapters that in Daniel, he was almost sick and he fasted for a couple of weeks trying to figure out what are these visions all about. And he was told, don't worry about that. When the time comes, people will study it and they will see what it is really all about.
Okay.
But Daniel still, he prayed to God and he was worried about it because he was hoping that things would end much, much quicker. But he was told, don't worry about it. So the final message that God gives to Daniel is this: go your way to the end, then you will enter into rest and rise again for your allotted portion at the end of the age. So he says, don't worry about it. Write it down so the people in the future, they can study it and they can find out and prepare for it. And you have done your duty. And you may not understand it fully, but later on people will.
Okay.
And the same thing with us. We may not always understand what we are doing, but we may have an impact that has impact much later on. We never know what it is, but if we just allow God to lead us, then He will.
All right. Sounds good.
I think of perhaps one experience I had even in this particular church. There was we were studying one of the biblical topics, the weekly topics, and I was guiding the study, and I asked one of the ladies in the group, could she read the text that was referred to? And she did. And she told me later on, it made such an impact on her. She had grown up as a Christian, but she had never read the Bible. And the fact that, and she belonged to a church, but she had never opened the Bible.
Wow.
But the fact that I had asked her to read a text in the Bible made her make a decision. She wanted to follow that God.
Wow, that's awesome.
And she joined the church.
That's amazing.
So you never know.
Never know.
What age it is, what it is that you say, but if you have an open mind to what God tells you and allow Him to use you, He may use you in surprising ways.
That's awesome. Now we're looking at, does age matter? And we're looking at it from Daniel's life.
Yeah.
As you said, he's older now and he's getting all these amazing visions. We're looking at it from your life too. So let's recap real quick. For Daniel, does age matter?
Didn't seem.
Didn't seem to.
No. We find even more emphasis on Daniel praying and pleading with God, help me to understand what you are doing in the latter time of his age than in the earlier times.
Okay. So as time progressed, his walk with God, his relationship with God deepened, his
Yeah.
knowledge deepened, his experience. And so somebody may be retired now, or they're older, they're using a walker, they're stuck in a wheelchair, they can't do the things they used to do. Their knees creak, you know, they got to put oil in their joints.
Yeah.
And they're wondering if they're useful or if they're valuable or if God loves them anymore.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that it's when Daniel's older that God specifically sends him a message that God loves him,
Yeah.
and he gives him the greatest revelation
Yeah.
from Daniel chapter 10. Jesus himself,
Yeah.
in the last vision that he receives, appears to Daniel.
Yeah.
And that's his greatest revelation, right?
Yeah.
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 That's awesome.
And as I said, from the other experience with this lady, I mean, even in a wheelchair or whatever state you are, if you're open to God's guidance, He can make you either say or do something that you may not think is significant, but it may make all the difference in the life of the individual.
That's awesome.
And so don't despair.
Okay.
Even if you're older, you may feel, I cannot go to the mission field anymore. I cannot do this. I cannot do that. But you can be a tool that God uses without you even realizing it,
Yeah.
reaching out to individuals and bring them something that is of a blessing to them.
That's awesome. Thank you. Any final words of wisdom?
I think one of the things that we can, greatest things we can learn from Daniel's experience is that no matter what, if you're faithful to God, God is going to be faithful to you. His three friends, they wanted to be faithful to God. They were thrown into fire, but the only thing that burned were the ropes that bound them.
Yeah.
And they were made leaders of the nation. They didn't plead for it, they didn't apply for it as such, but the king saw that these are valuable individuals. So we never know what God can use in order to reach out to people, because He loves the people. And even the famous king, one of the most famous kings in the Babylonian Empire, Nebuchadnezzar, he ultimately turned to God, and he is the only what we would call pagan king that has written one of the chapters in the Bible,
That's right.
telling about his own experience. Where did he get that experience from? He had been working with Daniel and his three friends for multiple years, and he ultimately saw what it was all about, and God used them. So no matter what age we are, whether we're young teenagers, children, individuals of working age, or old people, God can use you and me and reach out to people, and we may never know this side of eternity what benefit we have been to them.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Olafsson. We really appreciate it. And thank you for allowing God to use you today.
Well, thank you. I hope some of it may reach someone, and might be of encouragement to someone.
I believe so.
And God bless you.
Thank you. Same to you.
Okay.